Strategic Management course. Final exam presentation. We are going to be presenting on the topic corporate governance for the final exam presentation. Group members. First group member, Igwe Okereke Ikpo. Second, that's myself, Glenn Linyoy Fontintin. And the third, Jamjut Ngong. Move now to the introduction of our work. To begin, corporate governance is a set of relationships between a company's directors, its shareholders, and other stakeholders. Here we should note that the relationship is between the main members of the company or the firm. That is those who make the rules and regulations on how the firm is going to operate. It also provides structure through which the objectives of the company are set. As I just said, they provide like the structures which the aims or the goals of a company are set, and the means of obtaining these objectives and monitoring performances are determined. Corporate management can also be defined as a group of senior executives and managers who are responsible for leading, directing, and administrating an organization. That is, those who, like, it's made up of this group of senior or high executive members and managers who are responsible for the operating strategic ways in which the company or the firm is going to operate. Corporate management works as a team to lead and direct the company's work towards the executive level goals. This all boils down to our bone of contention, as we are going to further explain the corporate governance concepts, like the principles, policies, and practices, corporate governance organizations and control, and corporate governance regulatory guidance. So we're going to move to the core of our work. The first part of the core of the work is going to be titled Corporate Governance. That is principles, policies, and practices. The first, corporate governance defined. Corporate governance is about the exercise of power over corporate entities. It covers activities of the board and its relationship with the stakeholders or members, and with those managing the enterprise, as well as the external auditors, regulators, and other legitimate stakeholders. Move to the next point, which is attributes of a limited liability company. The key concept of a joint stock limited liability, separate from the owners, as many of the legal property rights of a real person, to contact, to sue, and be sued, to own property, and to employ. The company has a life of its own, giving continuity beyond the life of its founders could transfer their shares in the company. Crucially, the owner's liability for the company's debt is limited to their equity investment. The next point is basics of corporate power. Ownership is the basis of power over the joint stock limited company. And last but not the least point, Bell and Means study. Bell and Means draw attention to the growing separation of power between the executive management of major public companies in their increasingly diverse and remote shareholders. We'll move to the next part of policies, which is the corporate governance, organization and control. CG is the system. CG here is corporate governance. That is, corporate governance is the system by which organizations are directed and controlled. For corporate governance to be effective, it must be embedded as a feature of the inherent business culture. Qualities to ensure the best decisions are made. The first, integrity. Integrity here is the straightforwardness of company, that is like fair dealing, honesty and completeness in relationships. So the integrity here has to do with straightforwardness, fair dealing, honesty and completeness in relationships of the company, of the company's corporate governance. The next, fairness. Fairness here has to do with balance, respecting the rights and views of any stakeholders with legitimate interests. That is, fairness here respects the rights of the stakeholders. That is, the stakeholders here like the managers, shareholders, all those with legitimate interests to the company in the corporate governance. The next is the judgment. Judgment here is it has to do with taking decisions that enhance organization's prosperity, and those who take these decisions are the managers, shareholders, the senior members of the company. That is, they are the ones who take the judgment to enhance the organization's prosperity. The next, independence. Independence here has to do with being free from constraints or influences that will prevent correct actions being taken. Under independence, we have two major parts under independence. That is, independence of mind and independence of appearance. The next point is skepticism. Professional skepticism is an attitude that includes a questioning mind, being alert to conditions which may indicate possible misstatements due to error or fraud, and critically assessing audit evidence. That is, skepticism here is an attitude which has to do with questioning minds, being alerted to conditions which may allocate possible misstatements or misunderstandings due to errors or mistakes of fraud and critical assessing audit evidence. We should also note that non-executive directors, that's the net, the non-executive directors show skepticism to challenge executive directors effectively.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Greetings to you, dear Prof. Thank you, Glenn Linwang Kufontintin, for giving me the floor to talk on Bullock Committee report. The Bullock Committee report, the report of the Committee of Inquiry on Industrial Democracy, proposed a continuation of the unitary board but with workers' representative directors. Proposal from corporate report from the Accounting Standard Committee. The corporate report called for all economic entities to report publicly and to accept accountability to all those whose interests were affected by the director's decision. Some corporate collapses in the world that led to the first studies of corporate governance. In Australia, Alan Bond, Laurie Connell of Woodwell, and the Given Corporation. In Germany, Nomura Securities and the Recruit Corporation. In the United States, Ivan Boesky, Michael Levin, and Michael Milken of Drexel, Bonham and Lambert. In the United Kingdom, the Guinness Case and Robert Maxwell's companies are all examples of corporate bodies that collapse in the world and whose collapse led to the first studies of corporate governance. We'll now talk about the first official report on corporate governance and why was it commissioned. Major recommendations of the CASI study. The first report on corporate governance in 1992 came from Sir Adrian Cadbury in the United Kingdom and was on the financial aspect of corporate governance. The committee he chaired was set up in response to various company collapses. The report called for a wider use of independent outside, non-executive directors, audit committees as a bridge between board and external auditors, separation of the role of chairman of the board and chief executive. We'll now talk on the auditors and audit committee. Thus, auditors and audit committee should demonstrate professional skepticism, transparency. 1. Opens disclosure in financial statements, press releases, websites. 2. Not concealing information when it may affect decisions. 3. Default position of disclosure rather than concealment. 4. includes information in financial statements and other documents. 5. Helps avoid information asymmetry between managers and shareholders. 6. Underpins stock market confidence and reassures investors. The reputation. Other people's perception or expectations, a valuable asset of any organizations. Openness. Disclosure in financial statement, press release, websites. Not concealing information when it may affect decisions. Default position of disclosure rather than concealment. Includes information in financial statement and other documents. Helps avoid information asymmetry between managers and shareholders. Underpins stock market confidence and reassures investors.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, my able prof and my fellow classmates. I am to continue from where my group mate stopped, Jam Jude. First of all, I have to refer to our introduction part of the study, where my first presenter made us to understand that corporate governance is a set of relationship between a company's directors, its shareholders, and other stakeholders that is also provide structure through which the objective of the company are set. In that light, we now move to the corporate governance regulatory guidance. The regulatory guidance, first of all, we are going to look at the OECD, which is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. They are non-binding principles intended to assist governments in their effort to evaluate and improve their legal, institutional, and regulatory framework for corporate organizations in their various countries, which means this organization has the ability to put their effort in evaluation and improvement of the legal entities, the institutional, which is the place of education, and the regulatory framework in their various countries. Then we are going to look at the principles of Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. The first one there, we say that it has the OECD principles are grouped into various buds. The right of a shareholder with reference to the introduction, or you say the meaning of corporate governance, which means the right of a shareholder has to be protected or defended in an organization. The equitability treatment of the shareholder, which is the second one, which means each and every one of them has to be treated equally or in a fairness. Then the next one is their roles, the role of stakeholders, which means each and every one of them who are stakeholders in a company has a role to play. Each of them, their role must count for the company or the organization which they are belonging to grow or to improve successfully in their endeavors. Then the next one is disclosure and transparency, which means whatever thing they are doing has to be open and transparent to everyone. Then the other one is the responsibilities of the board. This board has a responsibility bestowed on them to carry out as long as organization they belong to is concerned. All hands must be on deck to move the organization forward. Then the International Corporate Governance Network, which is ICGN, also has its role to play. The last one, the purpose, is to provide practical guidance for boards to meet investors' expectations so that they can operate efficiently and complete for scarce capital effectively, which means efficiency is highly needed in order to complete the scarce of capital effectively. The International Corporate Governance Network DANS emphasize the following points in particular. The first point there is sustainable value. Long-term success is a prerequisite of good governance, which means sustainability is needed in order to consider an organization or a corporation as being governed in a good way. Board must be effective, diverse, experienced, and accountable for their actions, which means organization is not a place where one can just do or play anyhow. Whatever you do there must reflect in the activity of the board, which means the board must be very careful in whatever thing they are doing. They must be effective, diverse, experience, and accountability for every of their actions. Corporate culture should support ethical behavior. Every organization has its own ethics, and they are there for the corporation or organization to maintain their ethical behavior, or you can say their standard. We call it sometimes a layout standard. It has to be followed or maintained. Risk management should be formally undertaken in line with shareholders' expectation. Risk cannot just be taken. It must be in line. It must be in line and in expectation that is already known to the shareholders. They cannot be taken unawares. It must be their expectation. Remuneration should be transparent and align with risk and other objectives. Remuneration is the exchange of goods for other services, which means when you are doing that, it must be in line with the risk and the objective involved in it. Audit should be robust, effective, and independent. In every organization, auditing is one thing that is always happening in order to maintain the effectiveness of that organization. Disclosure and transparency should be at the heart of all relations with stakeholders, which means there must be transparency in the hearts of every stakeholder for no one to feel cheated among them. Shareholders' rights should be protected and respected by the directors. In as long as an organization is concerned, shareholders are part of the company or organization. Whoever that is given the mantle of director should not use it to clamp on the shareholders. The shareholders has rights which has to be respected and also to be protected. Shareholders' responsibilities should also be respected by the shareholders, which means among the shareholders, they have their individual responsibilities. Each and every one of them must respect the others. In conclusion, in a nutshell, corporate governance is the foundation by which a company regulates and directs. Through this corporate governance, a foundation has been laid which the company has to look upon in order to regulate and direct their affairs. It is a set of guidelines, procedure, and discipline that executive utilize to standardize a corporation. Without corporate governance, some of the organization will not have any headway. They will be working sheepishly. But looking at corporate governance, the governance will guide them to the right channel. There are many influences that impact a firm's corporate governance, like its executive personnel and board of directors. Just like we said earlier, that the directors should not use their position to intimidate the shareholders or any other person in that organization that has a say. Being elected by a firm shareholder, the board's tax plays an integral role in a firm. They determine the purpose and values by which a company will build a foundation on, which means whoever that is much is given, also much is expected of him. The directors should always realize that they are the key players in a company. Much task is bestowed on them. We should not note that in general sense, corporate governance can be described with two general categories. good and bad corporate governance, which means there's a way you operate or there's a way you govern your organization. You will govern it badly or you govern it well. The standard of a good corporate governance system are determined by its ability to set rules and guidelines that can coexist with a firm's integrity and well as good public perception, which means whatever you project to the public is what will be seen as you in your company. On the other hand, bad corporate governance raise doubt on a firm's integrity due to illegal actions, which was evident in corporate fraud case around the years. Thank you for listening. I believe so much that we were able to explain it to your understanding. Thank you for listening.